Right, what I will show you now is how to round to the nearest 10, and then after that I'll show you how to round to the nearest 100, 1000. Right, first one, round to the nearest 10. So this number, 4,328 to the nearest 10. When you want to round to the nearest 10, look at the ones column. Okay, we're not looking at the tens column now, we're looking at the ones column right next to it. You ask yourself the question, is that 5 or more? Is that number 5 or more? Of course it is, it's an 8, it's more than 5, it's 5 or more. So then what happens to the tens column? The 2 rounds up to a 3, right? And then put a 0 there, in that placeholder, and then copy all the other numbers. So that number rounded to the nearest 10 is this over here. Right, so 28 is closer to 30 than it is to 20. Let's try another number. Right, I'm going to round this to the nearest 10, so you look at the ones column. You look at the ones column, ask yourself a question, is it 5 or more? Well, it is 5, so yes, the answer is yes. So the 8 will become a 9, don't forget the 0, and then copy all the other numbers on the left hand side, or however many numbers there are on the left hand side. Let's try another one. Right, rounding to the nearest 10. Look at the ones column. Is it 5 or more? No, it's not. We don't round that one down, we keep it the same this time, so that becomes 2, and everything else stays the same as well. Don't forget the 0 there. So that's been rounded to nearest 10. So basically 24 is closer to 20 than it is to 30. Right, let's try this one. Rounded to nearest 10. Well, look at the ones column. Is that 5 or more? Yes, it is. So the 9 becomes a 10. Carry the 1. I can see I've carried the 1 there. So 9 becomes a 10. Don't forget to put a 0 under the ones placeholder. Now 4 and 1, now 4 and little 1 makes 5. And don't forget to copy all the numbers on the left hand side. So that ranked nearest 10 is this one over here. Right, this time I want to round to the nearest 100. Let's try a number. Right, we round to the nearest 100 over here. And right next to it we've got the tens. So we look at the tens column and ask that question, is that 5 or more? Is that 7, 5 or more? Of course it is. So that 3 rounds up, it becomes a 4. Don't forget the zeros, and then don't forget to copy the numbers on the left hand side. There you go. 378 is closer to 400 than it is to 300. Let's try another one. To the nearest 100. So we look at, that's the hundreds column, so we look at the tens column right next to it. Ask yourself the question, is it 5 or more? No. So that 2 stays the same, everything else stays the same. Don't forget the zeros in the placeholder. So that 242 is closer to 200 than it is to 300. That's what it is. Right, another one. Right, round that to the nearest 100. Look at the tens column, not the hundreds column, look at the tens column. Is that 5 or more? Well, it is a 5 or more. Yes, answer is yes. So that means a 3 will become a 4, it'll round up, and everything on the left hand side stays the same. Don't forget the zeros there. Let's try this one here. Round to the nearest 10, so you look at the round to the nearest 100, to the nearest 100, so we look at the tens. Is that 5 or more? Yes, it is. So that becomes a 3. It rounds up to a 3 and everything else stays the same. Don't forget the zeros. Now round to the nearest 1000. Right, look at the thousands column. Right next to it, we've got the hundreds. So we need to ask questions about this. Is that 5 or more? No. So everything on the left hand side stays the same. Don't forget the zeros. Let's try this one. To the nearest 1000, here's the thousands column. So we look at the hundreds column. Ask yourself the question, is it 5 or more? Yes, it is. So the 1 becomes a 2 and everything else stays the same. Don't forget the zeros. Right, last one. In fact, make that 8. Right. Round to the nearest 1000, so we look at the hundreds column. Is it 5 or more? Yes, it is. So the 9 becomes a 10. Carry the 1. So 3 add 1 is 4, and then copy all the numbers on the side. Don't forget the zeros. If you want to round to the nearest 10,000, so obviously you're going to look at the thousands column and start asking the question. Right, let's do this then. You're going to round to the nearest 10,000, which is here. So you look at the thousands column and ask yourself the question, is it 5 or more? In this case, it's not. So keep everything the same on the left hand side and then zeros. Right, let's try this one. Right, to the nearest 10,000. So we look at the thousands column again. Ask yourself the question, is that 5 or more? Well, it is. So the 9 becomes a 10. Carry the 1. Right, 9 plus 1, over here, 9 plus 1 makes a 10. Don't forget the zeros under the placeholders. There you go. Right, first I'm going to round this one. It's quite an awkward number here. To the nearest 10, this one here. When you round to the nearest 10, remember, you look at the ones. That's the tens, that's the ones. You look at the ones, you ask yourself the question, is it 5 or more? Yes, it is. So that 9 becomes a 10. Some basic maths now. 9 add 1 is 10. 9 add 1 is 10. Don't forget to put the 0 under the placeholder. Right, let's do the same thing again, but this time to the nearest 100. So when you round to the nearest 100, which is here, the hundreds, you look at the tens. Ask yourself the question, is it 5 or more? Yes, it is. Right, so the 9 over here will become a 10. Carry the 1. Basic maths, 9 add 1 is 10. And don't forget to put the zeros under the placeholder. We still get the same number, don't we? For this number, round to the nearest 10, we get 10,000. Round to the nearest 100, we still get 10,000. This time to nearest 1,000. Here's the thousands, so we look at the hundreds and we ask ourselves the question, is it 5 or more? Yes, it is. So that 9 becomes a 10. Don't forget the zeros. Right, I want to find the largest whole number, which when rounded to the nearest 100 will give me 300 as an answer. That largest number happens to be 349. Think about it. If you round that to the nearest 100, you get 300. Right? And the smallest number, which when rounded to the nearest 100 to give you 300, is going to be 250. Think about it. 250 to the nearest 100 does give you 300. But if we chose a number smaller than, even smaller than that, like 249, 249 rounded to the nearest 100 actually gives you 200, not 300. So 249 is too small because that will round to 200, not 300. That's too small. But 250 rounded to the nearest 100 does give you 300. And the largest number I said is that one. If you chose a number slightly bigger than that one, let's say 350. Now 350 rounded to the nearest 100 actually gives you 400, not 300. So 350 is too much. Okay, so that's the smallest and the largest. And any numbers in between 250 and 349, any numbers in between, which are rounded to the nearest 100, will give you 300. So here's a little trick to find the largest and the smallest possible numbers that would round to the nearest 100 to give you 700. Right, think about 100, that's 100. Half of 100 is 50. So you take away 50 from this one to get the smallest one. For this one, you add 50, and then minus 1. That's going to be 750 minus 1, 749. So 749 rounded to the nearest 100 gives you 700, and 650 rounded to the nearest 100 gives you 700. That's the largest and that's the smallest. And any numbers in between rounded to the nearest 100 will give you 700. Right, try this one. Find the largest and the smallest. Largest and smallest possible whole numbers to the nearest 100. Largest number to the nearest 100 to give you that one. Well, think about 100. Half of 100 is 50. So you subtract 50 from that. For the other one, you add on 50 and then minus 1. So that'll be 2,350, but minus 1, that'll be 2,349. Okay, largest, smallest. Right, this one's slightly different. Okay, think about the largest number and the smallest number. That when rounded to the nearest 1,000, that gives you 3,000. So see that 1,000 there? Half of 1,000 is 500. So you subtract 500 from this, get 2,500. And then you add on 500 to this, but then subtract 1. That would be 3,499. So what I'm trying to say is, this is the largest possible number, which when rounded to the nearest 1,000 will give you 3,000. And that's the smallest possible number, which when rounded to the nearest 1,000 will give you 3,000. Okay, you can try it yourself and find out for yourself. And any numbers in between 2,500 and 3,499, any numbers in between, when rounded to the nearest 1,000, will give you 3,000.